Hi, I just decided to do a quick walkthrough of the dam brick because somebody asked how I did this. So I'll just walk through the settings and show you what I did. The main question was about speed optimization for the euphoric solver. And also, if you haven't seen this, this is what this looks like. It's just a double dam brick. So there's foam and there's liquids. This is about 300,000 particles. And we're getting roughly, for the simulation, it's like 8 seconds per frame with 7 sub-steps, 6 sub-steps. So I can just walk through how I did that. So the scene is pretty simple. We've just got some a domain, 2 columns for the dams, for the breaking dams. But I cheated a bit for the container that holds the fluid. I removed the flow. I wanted to speed that up again. So that was like about 20,000 particles maybe, and I just put an infinite plane at the bottom there. So anything below that would be like an invisible flow. So I didn't need to put particles there. So but you need the flow for collisions for the foam later on. So don't forget that. Otherwise the foam particles will just fall through. So it's better to have 2, one for simulation and one for the collision object. That's important. So can just simulate this to show that it's actually roughly 8 seconds per sub-step. Let's just abort that. Let me just hide these particles. Oh, wait 1 second. Let's see the domain. Okay, fluid can. Okay. Okay, let's just simulate that. So on average it will be around 8 seconds for this per step, so that's for 7 sub-steps. And I simmed this is about 234 frames. I got that in about 1 hour to 2 hours. So you can look at a simulation time of that. So it will vary between 8 to 14 seconds, obviously. And the variation, obviously, it's an adaptive solver, so it depends on the density error. So it's not constant. So it depends what the density is. The pressure, and it will try to correct to 1%. So the lower this is, the more accurate it is, and the longer it will take. That's the density error, so don't forget that. Another important factor to speed this up was the time step. I put a really high time step. So this is probably the highest you can go for version 2. Sorry, I'm using experimental version of the new one. So this is for the older version of, if you've got the current version that's actually available, it's version 2.52. So this is, just ignore that this is version 3. This is the next one I'm working on, so I've just moved. It's the same solver, nothing's changed at the moment. So the important thing is to put high time steps. So I use 0.04 and sub-steps of, 6. And you'll be getting this roughly 8 seconds per frame. As you can see, it's still moving there. To continue doing that. 1 second, I think there's a problem here. I forgot to set something. Okay, now. 1 second, abort. Did you forget to do while exploding? That was definitely there. Sorry, let me just try that. I think I changed something earlier. Shouldn't be exploding. Okay, wait, let me just make sure this doesn't explode. I think I switched off something. Anyway, yeah, so I'll just continue. If it explodes, I'll just fix it. Yeah, it's good to see how to fix the simulation if it's not working. What else that needs to be changed? So but because of the low whatever time steps and density, I think it was higher than this. I'm not sure anyway. I put up the pressure relaxation. It's normally 25 by default. So this is important. This will make the simulation stiffer. And I removed velocity dampening because I wanted more waves, more splashes. So that was necessary for this. I was looking for calm waves, so I disabled the velocity dampening for that. So those are the main settings that actually to get 300,000 particles to simulate like this. So let me just make sure it doesn't explode. Let me just make sure I haven't forgotten something, because it's been a few weeks since I did this. Okay, yeah, that's solved it, sorry. The pressure density was too high. The density error was too high there. So that looks like it was fixed. Is it fixed? It's not exploding anymore. Okay, yeah, it's working now. Yeah, so yeah, there's a tip. If something's not working, just drop the density error. So it's still roughly 8 seconds. As you can see, it's still moving at roughly the same speed. So it will vary obviously, because right now it's trying to solve for higher pressures there. And another thing is, since this is very high, I put a sink here. So I didn't really care about losing a few particles in the very beginning of the simulation. Okay, so when it's actually doing the collisions, it will do the most processing. And initial collisions, some particles will go through, but not so many particles that the liquid will lose volume. So I didn't really care about that. So I put a sink for this. So there's a few particles coming out of here, but majority stay in actually. So less than maybe 1% of the particles are lost, but it's not really important for the visual. For the final product. As you can see here, it doesn't really make a difference that a couple of particles disappeared. Okay. So yeah, pretty much this will go on for like an hour to whatever minutes. And another question was if the solver uses all the cores, and the answer is yes. So as you can see, it's using 16 threads. So I'm using I'm on a Ryzen 2008 core. So yeah, it's using all the cores fully. So it's completely multi-threaded for those who are worried about that. And there's also the GPU option for those with a compatible card. So at the moment it's disabled because obviously I'm working on different stuff. So that's another way to accelerate your simulations. So actually that would have been good for this, but I didn't actually, since I just used the CPU, since it's better, I guess, for most people. I guess it's a fair comparison to everybody's system. So what else? Yeah, those are the main things, I think. So it was pretty simple. It's a very simple simulation here. You can ignore the rigid stiffness because we're not simulating rigid coupling. Yeah, so time steps and density error. So I think you can actually have a higher density error here. Just do this. And you can use coherence. I think it's exploding again. It doesn't matter. I'm gonna use coherence here. Sorry. I'm just working off memory. I didn't save the settings for this. So I wasn't sure if anybody was interested in how I did this. 1 second. Okay, done. Okay, so it's exploding a bit there. So you can enable the coherence as well. So I think you can also have a higher. I've forgotten the exact settings for this, but just have to tune it until you get what you want. I'm gonna just attempt one here. Okay, I'm gonna attempt one here and just say simulate with coherence. Yeah, okay. So the coherence is good. It deals with shocks as well. So that's another good thing about it. So hopefully that will fix that. So that will add extra bit of time, but not that much time. It will still be roughly in the same ballpark. as before. And while that's simulating, we'll have a look at that again. I can look at the foam simulation. So I didn't redo the foam, but I think it was pretty straightforward. So yeah, this is what it looks like, the red particles of the foam. So the main important thing here is just to get your collision geometry correct. Okay, so just stop this. Let's see, just add a random object to the scene to explain the most important setting that might trip you. Oops, what was that? I zoomed into the part. Oh, okay, sorry about that. Just added the sphere, so just add the sphere as a rigid object. So yeah, just make sure to flip the normals depending on where the normals are facing. So if the particles penetrate the domain, whatever, just flip them, not to normally fix it. And if you have any more problems, sometimes this happens, just make sure your scale is exact, okay? Just make sure it's a 1-to-1 scale, just for the geometry, even though it's not important for the simulation. If you're having problems, this will probably solve it as well. Just scale of 1-1. So I think there's just a difference within the internals. I'll have a look at that. I don't think it's that important. So sometimes to get confused in the scales. Yeah, but just to be sure, just make it 1-by-1, and your collision geometry should be fine. And you will get that. So as for settings, I think I left the default settings, but I did a lot of experimenting. So I dropped it for experimentation. So for this, it was actually within 5 frames, it was nearly 1 million particles. So I dropped it. This I started like with 80,000, 100,000 to 80,000 particles just to experiment with these settings. The only other thing I changed was the max life. I made them infinite. So that's another thing. Be careful. Your particles start dissolving depending on your minimum life. So I just put a really high value there. And so life is pretty much, this is just a fraction of a second, so that's easy to calculate. So this is about 60 frames per second. So you just divide that will give you how many of those you need to get 1 second. Okay, so that's 1 frame, so you can do the calculations there to give you, you can set your minimum life, maximum life, and how many seconds. So this is seconds, just for clarification. This is in seconds, and this is also in seconds. Technically that's milliseconds, but you can just think of that as a second, a fraction of a second. So that's a second as well for the time step. So how many of these go into this, and that will give you that. So and then for the final one was, I believe, yeah, 200. I think I just used 200, and eventually I got 700,000 particles for that. And then wait, let's just have a look at this. Now it's still exploding. That's not what we want. Sorry about this. Sorry about this. Let me just drop it. Did I put the pressure relaxation? Maybe it was 0.5. I want to get this right before the video, so I don't seem like I am being truthful. So I would leave the coherence on again. That's not what we want. It exploded again. So pressure relaxation is just the stiffness of the simulation. So that's just high to stop them from spilling through the simulation. So hopefully that was it. I'm trying to remember. And anyway, okay. So then for renderings, very straightforward. These are just little spheres. Here, so instanced. And there's another video on the channel. You can actually go into detail about generating foam and linking the particle. Actually, a few of the videos go into that, talking about instancing the particles using the particle generator. The only thing I have noticed is that above 500,000 particles, there will be some slowness, because I don't know if it's on my end or the light wave, because those particles have to be generated into light wave particle system before they become instances. So above 500,000, you'll be seeing, I know there'll be a pause to do some calculations, but if you switch off the particle, whatever, attached particles on the, what do you call it, on the domain, there's no problems for some strange reason. So you'll be seeing gaps in that or some slowdown there. Let me just see if I can find. Yeah, so if you detach the particle effects, there's no problems, but when you attach it above 500,000 particles, you start to see a slowdown when it generates the light wave particle system. So I don't know if you can optimize that or if it's a light wave thing, and I'll have a look at that. And so an advise in the future, etc. And then shading the spheres is pretty straightforward. Everything is off except luminosity. And I think to add some transparency in this. So yeah, just some luminosity at 50%, color white, and that's about it. And I added some motion blur for the particles. That's about it. So don't forget to scale down the particle length for that. That's about it actually, and to get you this result essentially of the particles. And let's just have a look at this. Okay, this footage will be slightly long. We're just waiting to see what happens to these particles. I'm sure I should have got it right here. And also the settings varied according to scenes. So not all the scenes might, the timestamp of 0.0 might be too high actually. So since this is simple, I think it works well. So that's another thing to experiment on. Okay, so going in. And also enabling, what you call it, the coherence can actually help sometimes speed up the simulation, because in the consecutive cycles there'll be less pressures to solve as well. So sometimes it's helpful to switch it down, but it helps get rid of shock. So if you've got fast moving velocities, that's what this is main for. So if you've got really fast moving particles, that helps smooth out the, what you call, the density and velocity fields for fluids. And sometimes it can help speed up the simulation, because yeah, it gets rid of divergence errors. Okay, I think, yeah, this is going in the right direction. Yeah, it would have exploded at this point if it wasn't working. Yeah, so yeah, this will get you to the end. So yes, so maybe even a lower pressure relaxation could get you there. And it's about experimentation. I forgot the exact settings, but yeah, it's roughly in there. But the turnaround's pretty quick, as you can see. We managed to do this several times to see what's happening there. And if something's going to go wrong, it's most likely going to go wrong in the very first seconds, because that's when the highest pressures are in the simulation. So after maybe 20 frames, if there's nothing wrong, your simulation should probably be fine. So yeah, so if something's going to go wrong in that department, it's probably going to be in the first frames when the most things are happening. Just let it go for a few more. I'll do time 13 to see if there's any problem there. Or not, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's fine. So yeah, we're not getting pressure explosions anymore there. I can just import that. So yes, that's how I did that. So it's about experimentation depending on the scene. So it's better to start off with lower, what do you call this, particle count, obviously, to do this. I think I did this really small, and then once I got the settings correct, I moved on from that. And of course, I've been doing lots of simulations with this, so I can pretty much guess some of the settings. So for example, I know how to fix things. So, and you won't really have these problems if you stick with the default 0.01 time step. So that is like, if you want a perfect simulation, you don't want to worry about errors, just leave it at 0.01. So it'll be slower, but your simulation will be more accurate. Yeah, because you can solve things like leaks just by giving the collision objects smaller spacing there. It's not a big deal. So if you don't worry about explosions, just leave it on 0.001. And the density, yeah, the default settings are good for that. Pretty much, that will guarantee you just get a simulation that works with no errors. But it will be slower, obviously, because like I said, it's a progressive solver there, so it's trying to solve the particles. I mean, sorry, the pressures dynamically, so it's not like it's got 4 iterations and it moves on to the next frame there. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that makes more sense. And that's how I did that, I guess. So that's just for 240 frames. Optimize if you want more speed for a simple scene like that. That's what you do. And yeah, so then you can do your foam and rendering and all that stuff. Okay, thank you for watching. If you want to see something else, just you can email me, leave a comment and stuff like that. Okay, thank you. Bye bye.